Alice was getting very tired of sitting by her sister and having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures in it, and what use was a book without pictures, thought Alice. Lying there in the sun, it was no wonder Alice felt a little sleepy, and she couldn't decide whether to make a daisy chain or not, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran by. Well, that wasn't so strange. Nor did Alice think it odd when she heard the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat and looked at it, then hurried on, Alice stood up, for it crossed her mind that she had never seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat or a watch, so she ran after it, and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. Straight away Alice followed, never stopping to think of how she was to get out again. The rabbit hole was just like a long tunnel, then suddenly it dipped, and Alice found herself falling down a very deep well. She wasn't sure if the well was very deep, or if she was just falling slowly, for she had plenty of time to look around her as she went down. She noticed that the sides of the well were filled with cupboards and bookshelves, and there were some maps and pictures hanging on pegs as well. Down, down, down would she never stop falling. "I wonder how far and how many miles I've fallen," thought Alice. Still she kept falling, and because there was nothing else to do, she began talking to herself. At last the fall was over. She wasn't a bit hurt, and although it was dark, she could just see the white rabbit hurrying down a long passage. Away went Alice, and she heard the rabbit saying, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting." She was close behind it when she turned a corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. By now Alice was in a long, low hall with rows of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around, but they were locked, and Alice wondered how she was going to get out. On a table by one of the doors was a golden key, so around the hall she went. Strange! It didn't fit any of the doors. Just a minute, though. Here was a low curtain she had missed before, and behind it a little door only 15 inches high, and yes, the key fitted this door. But Alice couldn't even get her head through the door. Oh, what was she going to do? She went back to the table to make sure there were no other keys, and this time she found a little bottle. "Drink me," said the words on the label. Oh, that was all very well, but what if it was poison? However, the label would have said so. Alice tasted it, and it was so nice she drank it all. "What a funny feeling," thought Alice. "I'm getting smaller." Now she was only 10 inches tall, but what a nuisance. She'd left the key on the table, and she was too short to reach it. This was too much, and Alice sat down and cried. "What's the point of crying?" she thought. "That's not going to get me out of here." Soon her eye fell on a little glass box lying under the table. She opened it and found a small cake with the words, "Eat me," on it. "Well, I'll eat it," thought Alice, "and if I grow larger, I'll be able to reach the key, and if I grow smaller, then I can creep under the door, so either way I'll get into the garden." She started eating the cake, and very soon had finished it all. Goodness gracious, yes, she was getting taller, and after a few minutes her head hit against the roof, so she was now rather more than 9 foot high. Poor Alice! All she wanted was to find the white rabbit. And there he was, suddenly coming down the passage, still muttering to himself. As he came near, she began in a small voice, "If you please, sir." Oh, the rabbit got such a fright he dropped his white kid gloves and the fan and scurried away. Bother, thought Alice. It was getting so hot, and she picked up the fan to cool herself with it. How queer everything is today. And again she started talking to herself. As she looked down at her hands, she was surprised to see she had put one of Rabbit's gloves on. She must be growing smaller to have done that. She got up and went to the table to measure herself. She must be about 2 foot high and still shrinking. The fan she was holding was the cause of it, and quickly she dropped it. Oh, that was a narrow escape, or she may even have disappeared completely. Back to the little door she went, but it was shut again. And where was the golden key? Yes, on the table. With that, her foot slipped, and splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. At first she thought she was in the sea, but then realized she was in a pool of her own tears from when she had been crying. She managed to swim out, and while she was wondering what to do next, White Rabbit came trotting slowly back again. "The Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, my twitching whiskers! She'll have my head chopped off! Where did I drop them? Oh, dear!" The rabbit was saying to himself. Alice immediately guessed he was looking for the fan and white kid gloves, and she started hunting for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Very soon Rabbit noticed her and called in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home at once and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan." Alice was so frightened she ran off in the direction Rabbit pointed. She realized Rabbit had mistaken her for his housekeeper. All the same, she'd better take him his gloves and fan if she could find them. This wasn't easy, and you've no idea the things that happened to her and all the different animals she met. There was the puppy, the caterpillar, a pigeon, the pigs, and after some time she came to a little house. While she was standing staring at it, a fish came running out of the wood and knocked loudly on the door. The door was opened by a frog, all dressed up as a footman. Curiouser and curiouser, thought Alice. Eventually she decided to go in herself. Quietly she opened the door. This led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke, and in the middle, sitting on a three-legged stool, was the Duchess, nursing a baby. She was very rough with the baby, and very rude when she spoke to Cook and the others in the kitchen. Then she said to Alice, "Here, you nurse it for a bit," throwing the baby to Alice. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." Alice managed to catch the baby and thought to herself that if she didn't take it away, they'd be sure to kill it. The baby kept grunting, and Alice was just beginning to think what she would do with this creature when it gave a very loud grunt, and Alice, to her great surprise, discovered she was indeed carrying a pig. Putting it down on the ground, she watched it trot away into the wood. So Alice walked on, and she hadn't gone much further before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. Under a tree there was a table set, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep. The table was very large, but the three were all crowded together at one corner. "No room, no room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice, and sat down in a large armchair. "Have some wine?" said the March Hare. "I don't see any," said Alice, looking around. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then that wasn't very nice of you to offer it," said Alice. "It wasn't very nice of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare, and so it went on, remarks being passed back and forth. It was the maddest tea party she had ever been to. When she left, they didn't even notice her going, and once more she found herself in the long hall. I forgot to tell you she had found a mushroom somewhere during her travels, and if she nibbled this, it made her shrink. So after taking the golden key from the table, she nibbled on the mushroom, and then at last went through the little door into a most beautiful garden. She saw 3 gardeners dressed as playing cards, busily painting the roses red, and heard them saying, "Look out, 5, don't go splashing me with paint." "I couldn't help it," said 5. "7 jogged my elbow." To which 7 said, "That's right, 5, always blame someone else." Timidly, Alice asked them why they were painting the roses, and the gardeners told her it was because they were supposed to be red, but they had put a white one in by mistake, and if the Queen found out, she would chop off their heads, so they were painting them red. With that, there was the sound of many footsteps. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Next, the 10 courtiers, all covered with diamonds, and they walked 2 by 2. The royal children followed, decorated with hearts, and the guests, mostly kings and queens, had among them White Rabbit. Still they came, the Knave of Hearts carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion, and last of all came the King and Queen of Hearts. When the procession came opposite Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. "Who's this?" said the Queen to the Knave of Hearts. He just smiled. "Idiot," said the Queen, and turning to Alice she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name's Alice, so please your Majesty," said Alice very politely, but she thought to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards. There's no need to be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying by the rose tree. "How should I know?" said Alice. "It's no business of mine." The Queen turned crimson with rage and screamed, "Off with her head! Off!" "Nonsense," said Alice. "Consider, my dear, she's only a child," said the King. The Queen turned away and told the 3 gardeners to get up. "What have you been doing?" she said to them. They started to tell her, but before they could finish, the Queen said, "Off with their heads!" And the procession moved on. Alice turned to the 3 gardeners and quickly put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered about looking for them, and then marched off after the others. The Queen decided it was time to play croquet. It was the oddest game of croquet Alice had ever seen. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos. The soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. Everyone played at once, without waiting for turns, and the soldiers kept walking off and making arches somewhere else on the ground. Alice began to feel very uneasy, and wondered how she could escape when she saw the Duchess, who was in a much better temper than last time. While they were talking, the Queen called for the Mock Turtle. Mock Turtle? What next? So she met the Mock Turtle and the Gryphon, and while all this was going on, the Queen, who was still cross, said it was time for the trial to begin. What trial? The trial to find out who stole the tarts. Remember, the Queen of Hearts who made some tarts? This was all too much for Alice, but worse was to come, as Alice was called to give evidence, and she was very nervous. They asked her some very odd questions, until in the finish Alice said, "Oh, this is all nonsense." "Hold your tongue," said the Queen. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head," shouted the Queen. "Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards," Alice said. At that the whole pack of cards rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. She gave a little scream and tried to beat them off, and she found herself lying on the back, with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees. "Wake up, Alice," said her sister. "What a long sleep you've had." "Oh, I've had such a curious dream," she said, and began to tell her sister all that she could remember of her strange adventures in Wonderland. One day, when she had children of her own, she thought it would make a wonderful story. Alice in Wonderland. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. Mamma, in her kerchief and father his cap, had just settled down for a long winter nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, father sprang from his bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window he flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon, on the breast of the new-fallen snow, gave a lustre of midday to objects below, when what to his wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, he knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and Nick whistled and shouted and called them by name. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away all." as dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling father heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As he drew in his head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all covered with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his mouth, and the smoke, it encircled his hair like a wreath. He had a broad face, and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and father laughed when he saw him in spite of himself. A wink of Nick's eye and a twist of his head gave father to know he had nothing to dread. St. Nick spoke no words, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. Father heard him exclaim, as he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Once upon a time, there was a very adventuresome rabbit who lived under a big tree. It was all very snug and cosy, and there were many other rabbits to play with, but nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. So one day, when he hopped out into the sunshine, he thought, today I'll go adventuring. He turned to the other rabbits lying in the sun and said, "Who's going to come adventuring with me?" They all opened one eye and looked at him. "Adventuring?" said one. "What's that?" "Oh, looking around for something exciting to do." "All right, I'll come," said one. I'll come," said others. "Right," said the rabbit, "let's go." "Will it take a long time, this adventuring?" asked a dear little rabbit. She had often admired this big rabbit and rather liked him. "Oh, it depends," he said. Of course he was impatient now to be off. "Those coming then, follow me." And away went a line of rabbits hopping across the field. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 cottontails waggling in the sun. It wasn't long before they came to a field of cabbages. And as it was really near their lunchtime, they decided to stop and have a quiet meal. My word, what a mess they made of those cabbages. Some farmer would get an awful shock when he picked them to sell at the market. Anyhow, nothing exciting had happened yet, so it was time to move on with their adventuring. They seemed to have been hopping and hopping for a very long time, when suddenly they arrived at the edge of a field, and there was no more grass, just hard ground with nothing growing in it. Now, I can tell you that it was a road, but the rabbits didn't know this. Carefully, the big rabbit put one paw, and then another, and then all 4 onto the road. It felt all right. It smelt all right. It was just different. With a little leap, he said, "I do believe we've found something exciting, so follow me." And off down the road they all hopped. Suddenly, they heard a noise. Not very loud to begin with. They stopped. Up went their ears as the noise became louder and louder. They thumped their feet and went in all directions. The dear little rabbit, she followed the big rabbit, and she asked, "What was that?" "I don't know," he snapped. "Oh, please don't be cross with me,"
she said. "I'm very frightened, but I think you're just so brave." Well, the big rabbit was delighted, and he stretched his front legs and then his back ones, gave a little leap in the air and said to her, "You come with me and I'll look after you." He thumped his feet and sat up on his hind legs to look around. Next minute, the other rabbits had joined them. "We've had a discussion," said one, "and we think we should go home." "What?" said the big rabbit. "Nothing exciting has happened yet." "It has for us," said another, "and we're going home." "All right then, go," the big rabbit said, "but I'm going more adventuring." And he looked at his little friend beside him, and she said, "I'll follow you." So 3 rabbits turned round and started scampering for home, while the other 2 rabbits went hopping on. Soon it began to grow dark, and he knew he'd have to find somewhere snug and cosy to spend the night. Just for a moment, he wished they were back at the big tree. But only for a moment did he think that. Wait, what was that he could see up ahead? Certainly not trees, as he knew what they looked like. This, whatever it was much larger than trees, and it stood very still. Quietly, they hopped forward, just a little at a time. Next thing, oh my goodness, they were surrounded by a cage. How their hearts started beating faster as they turned round and round in circles, trying to find a way out. "Oh, look," said a little boy. "Daddy, look! I've caught 2 rabbits in my trap." "Well, careful," said his father. "They'll be very frightened." "I can put them in my new hutch," he said. "Won't that be fun?" It so happened that the top of the cage could be lifted off, so it made it much easier for the little boy and his father to each pick up one of the rabbits, which they did. Carefully they carried them up the road, past the farmhouse, and round to the back garden, where standing there in a corner was this lovely new hutch. Earlier that day, the little boy had gathered fresh straw from the barn and spread it out in the hutch, ready for the time when a rabbit might be caught in his trap. So the 2 rabbits were put in through the door of the hutch, and quickly they snuggled together in one corner, still shaking with fright. "You'd better give them some water to drink and some carrots and cabbage to eat," said the father. "Then maybe in the morning they'll have settled into their new home." Bright and early the next day, the little boy arrived out to see his new rabbits, and there they were quietly nibbling away at their food. "Good morning," said the little boy. "I do hope you like your new home. Now, you big rabbit, I'm going to call you Peter. And you little rabbit, well, I think I'll call you Mindy. Yes, that sounds good. Mindy and Peter. And I'll look after you ever so well." Of course he did. And the 2 rabbits, Mindy and Peter, were extremely happy in their new home, as it was very snug and cosy, and they always had fresh food and water. Besides, they could sit in their hutch and watch all the exciting things happening around them on the farm.
Near a big forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife. She was the stepmother to the woodcutter's 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. They were so poor there was not enough bread for them to eat. The woodcutter would lie awake at night worrying about how he could find food for his family. One night, his wife, who was a hard woman, said, "Early tomorrow morning we'll lead them far into the forest, give them a slice of bread each, and leave them to get on as best they can." Their father felt he couldn't do that, as the wild beasts might tear them apart. The wife went on and on, until her husband agreed to do it. The 2 children, who had not gone to sleep because they were so hungry, overheard what their stepmother said. "Don't cry, Gretel," said Hansel. "I'll help you." And when the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel crept out of the house and filled his pockets with as many little white pebbles as he could. Early the next morning, the stepmother woke the children and told them they were all going into the forest to chop wood. She gave them each a slice of bread and told them to keep it for later, as there wouldn't be any more, and they set out. As they went along, Hansel would drop a pebble every now and then, so they could find their way home. When they were in the forest, their father lit a big fire for them, and they were told to stay there and have a sleep. Their stepmother said they would come for them after they had chopped enough wood. Hansel and Gretel did as they were told. They ate their bread and then went to sleep. It was dark when they awoke, and Gretel began to cry. "Don't worry," said Hansel. "When the moon comes out, we'll follow my pebbles home." And sure enough, the pebbles shone as white, and they followed them home. When at last they reached the cottage, their father was so glad to see them, but their stepmother wasn't. Soon afterwards, there was even less bread for them to eat than before, and their stepmother decided to try her plan again. This time she made sure Hansel had no pebbles, and early the next morning off they went again. They each had their slice of bread, and when Hansel kept lagging behind, his father told him to hurry up. "I am only looking back to say good-bye to my little white birds sitting on the roof," said Hansel. His stepmother told him not to be so stupid, but every time Hansel dropped behind, he threw a crumb of his bread on the ground. This time they went far deeper into the forest. Their father built a large fire, and their stepmother told them they had fetched them that evening. Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, and then they slept for a little while. Once again, after they woke up, they waited for the moon to shine so they could follow the breadcrumbs home. This time, though, the birds had eaten all the crumbs, and the children were really lost. They wandered on, and Hansel kept telling Gretel they'd soon find the right way and not to worry. After 2 days of walking, they were still deep in the forest. They'd eaten berries off the bushes and slept at night under a tree. On the 3rd morning, they came in sight of a little cottage, and when the children came close to it, they could see it was made of gingerbread and candy. "We'll have a feast," said Hansel. "Let's have a piece of the roof first." So they sat down and started to eat. Presently, "Munching, crunching, munching, who's eating my house?" said a voice. "The wind, only the wind," replied the children, and went on eating. Suddenly the door opened, and there stood a strange-looking old woman. She was actually a witch, but the children didn't know this, so when she spoke kindly to them and invited them inside, they thanked her and went in. After she'd given them a lovely meal of milk and cakes, apples and raisins, she put them to bed, and they went off to sleep, thinking how lucky they were. The witch chuckled to herself. She was a wicked old woman, because she had made her house of nice things to eat, just to tempt little children, and when she had caught them, she cooked them and ate them. Next morning, after the children got up, the witch took Hansel out and shut him in a cage all by himself. When Hansel asked her what she was doing, she just ignored him and told Gretel to hurry up and boil some water so she could cook something good for Hansel to eat. Oh, she'd have to fatten him up a little before she ate him. Poor Gretel was very upset and cried bitterly, but she had to do as she was told. Each meal the witch took it out to the cage, unlocked the padlock on the door with one of the keys hanging on a cord round her waist. Gretel knew there was no hope of taking them and letting her brother out. She wished they'd never found the house. At least if they'd stayed in the forest, they wouldn't have been eaten by a wicked old witch. Every morning the witch would ask Hansel to stick out his finger so she could see if he was getting fat. Hansel knew that if she thought he was fat, she'd eat him. So he used to stretch out a chicken bone he had kept, and the old witch, having bad eyesight, thought the bone was his finger. After several weeks of this, the witch lost her temper and decided that, fat or thin, she'd cook Hansel.
She told Gretel to fetch some water for the pot, but first she'd bake some bread, and would Gretel creep inside the oven and see if it was hot enough? She had guessed the witch wanted to cook her at the same time, and that she meant to shut Gretel in the oven. "How shall I get in the oven?" asked Gretel.
"You silly goose," said the witch. "It's plenty big enough."
And she knelt down in front of the oven to show Gretel how. Quickly, Gretel pushed the witch in and shut the oven door. "Hansel, Hansel, we're saved!" she cried as she ran out and opened the cage. They danced for joy and fell into each other's arms. Before they left the witch's house, they went round and gathered some of her treasures, and then set out for home. They walked and walked, not really knowing the way. But soon they saw trees and paths they recognized, and they started running. At last they saw their father's cottage, and rushing inside, they threw themselves in his arms. Their stepmother had died, and he had not had a single happy moment since he had left the children in the forest. He was so happy to see them again. Of course, with the witch's treasure to buy food and clothes with, they were never hungry again, and they all lived happily together. It was summertime, and out in the country the corn was growing, the oats were green, the farmers had made their haystacks, and the young animals were running around. Everything was very busy, and it was lovely in the country at this time of the year. Beside one of the large meadows, bathed in sunshine, stood an old country house. It was surrounded by deep streams, with tall trees and bushes growing all around. Down by one of the streams, a duck was sitting on her nest, hatching out the little ducklings. Oh, it was such a tiring business, this waiting, as very few friends came to visit her, because they were too busy swimming about in the streams. At last, the eggs did crack, and out popped the ducklings, one after the other.
"Quack, quack,"
said Mother Duck.
"What a big place the world is,"
said her babies.
"Do you think this is the whole world?"
said Mother Duck.
"It stretches way beyond the other side of the garden, but I haven't been as far as that. Are you all here? No, that's not right. The biggest egg still hasn't cracked. Oh, how much longer will it take, I wonder?"
And once more she sat down. An old duck passing by asked how things were going, and when Mother Duck told him that one egg just wouldn't crack, he asked to have a look at it.
"It's probably a turkey's egg," he said. "I was taken in like that once. If I were you, I'd leave it and go and teach the other babies to swim."
Mother Duck thought about this, but she decided to sit just a little longer, as what did a few more days matter? When the egg eventually cracked, out crawled the baby. It was very big and very ugly. "That's an awfully big duckling," thought Mother Duck. It didn't look like the others at all, and she began to wonder if it really was a baby turkey. Well, the only way to find out was to go down to the water, and one by one the little ducklings plopped in. The water went right over their heads, but they soon came up again and started swimming very well. Even the ugly grey baby swam with them. "It's not a turkey," thought Mother Duck, "as it can swim well." So she was sure it was one of her babies. It was really very pretty if you looked at it properly. After a while, Mother Duck decided it was time to introduce her babies to the great world, and after telling them to use their legs, pull themselves together, and stretch out their necks, they set off. Their tour started in the duckyard, where there was an awful noise, as two families were having an argument. Some of the ducks weren't very friendly, and others made rude remarks. "Those are pretty children, Mother Duck, but look at that one there. He's so big and funny," they said. "Leave him alone," said Mother Duck.
He certainly isn't pretty, but he swims well, and I'm sure he'll be all right when he grows up." And she nudged his neck and smoothed out his feathers. "He is a drake," she went on, "so it doesn't matter quite so much." The old duck told them to make themselves at home. As time went on, things got really worse for the ugly duckling, as he was chased, bitten, teased, and even his sisters were horrid to him. So one day he ran away, far, far away from the duckyard, and as he passed bushes and trees, the birds flew up into the air. "That's because I'm so ugly," thought the little duckling, still running on. By night time he had come to a big lake where some wild ducks lived. He was very miserable and very tired, so he settled down at the edge of the lake and went to sleep. Early the next morning, one of the wild ducks flew over to him. "Hello, what sort of chap are you?" he asked. "You're very ugly, but we don't mind as long as you don't marry into our family." Of course, the poor little duckling had never thought of marriage. He just wanted a place to rest. That was not to be, as the next moment there were some loud bangs. It was duck shooting time, and there were men everywhere with their dogs. The little duckling was so frightened he hid his head under his wing. More shots rang out, and into the lake jumped the dogs. Suddenly, close beside the little duckling was a very big dog, with his tongue hanging out and his eyes all shining. He poked his nose right up against the duckling, showed his sharp teeth, and next thing he ran off without grabbing him. "Oh, that was lucky," thought the duckling. "I'm so ugly, even the dog doesn't like to bite me." So he lay quite still until the guns had stopped shooting, and when everything was quiet again, he hurried out of the lake and went rushing across some fields and meadows. Towards night time, he came to a broken-down hut where an old woman lived with her cat and hen. "You're a strange little thing," said the old woman, "but you can stay and lay me some duck eggs." So for 3 weeks the duckling stayed there, but no eggs came, because of course he was a drake. But the cat and hen didn't know this, and they just thought he was silly and not very good at laying eggs. So there he lay in a corner, feeling so miserable that he decided it was time he moved on. By now, autumn was nearly over, and it was becoming much colder. The poor little duckling was miserable and lonely, and one afternoon as the sun was setting, a whole flock of beautiful birds flew out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen anything so beautiful. They were very white, with long necks, and they gave a most peculiar cry. They were swans. They flew so high, and the little duckling was so excited just watching them that he whirled himself round and round in the water and gave such a loud cry he even frightened himself. As soon as they were out of sight, he dived to the bottom of the lake and back up again. He didn't know what the birds were called, nor was he even jealous of them, as it didn't enter his head to wish he was as lovely. All he wanted was for other ducks to be friendly with him and to find a new home. This wasn't easy, as no one wanted him, and by now it was winter and very cold, with ice on the water and snow everywhere. However, we'll try and forget that winter, as it was all very sad, and no one could have been happier when the sun shone again than the little duckling. The birds were singing in the trees, and the duckling found he could flap his wings strongly, and he could fly far higher. He decided he wanted to fly like those beautiful birds he had seen, and sitting on the water one afternoon, he stretched his neck, and as he looked at his reflection, he couldn't believe what he saw. No longer was he a clumsy, dirty grey bird, ugly and awkward, but a lovely swan. He was so happy he didn't know what to do. He ruffled out his feathers, stretched his slender neck, and cried out joyfully. He just didn't dream, when he was an ugly duckling, that there could ever be such happiness. There was once a little boy named Peter, and he lived in a small cottage near a great forest with his grandfather. Early one morning, Peter opened the garden gate and went into the forest to play with his friends. He had many friends in the forest. There was Robin Redbreast, and Quacky the Duck, and Tommy the Cat. Soon his grandfather came after him. He was annoyed because Peter had gone into the forest.
"I told you it was a dangerous place,"
he said to Peter when he found him.
"What if a wolf should come along? What would you do then?"
He took Peter by the hand, led him back to the garden, and closed the gate. No sooner had Peter gone than a great hungry wolf did appear in the forest. In a twinkling, Tommy the Cat scampered up a tree. Robin Redbreast flew to a branch above the cat, while Quacky the Duck, on seeing the wolf, quacked and quacked in her great excitement and started to run. But no matter how hard she ran, Quacky the Duck couldn't escape the wolf, and with one great gulp he swallowed her. So this was how things stood. Tommy the Cat was on one branch, and Robin Redbreast was on another, not too close to the cat, mind you. And the wolf walked round and round the tree, looking up at both of them with greedy eyes. Peter saw what was happening to his little friends, and as he watched, the wolf paced back and forth. Suddenly, Peter thought of a plan. Not being at all afraid, he went into the house and found a strong rope. Then, when the wolf wasn't looking, Peter climbed up the tree, made a lasso, and carefully lowered it down. In no time at all, he'd caught the wolf by the tail, and he pulled with all his strength. Feeling himself caught, the wolf began to jump wildly and tried to free himself. Peter tied the other end of the rope to the tree, and the wolf, twisting and turning, only made the rope tighter round his tail. In fact, the rope was so tight, the wolf cried out, and while his mouth was open, Quacky the Duck jumped out and was free again. Just then, shots were heard. Some hunters, who had been following the wolf's trail, came out of the forest, shooting as they walked. Peter shouted, "It's all right. I've already caught the wolf. Please help me take him to the zoo." And off they all went. There was Robin the Redbreast, Tommy the Cat, Quacky the Duck, Peter's grandfather, and the hunters carrying the wolf. Right out in front, though, was Peter, who marched proudly, for he alone had caught the wolf.